Thank you so much, Sophie. And before I start, this is the last event of 3 days of amazing events that I've been to lots of. So I also want to say a huge thank you to Sophie and Sian. It's an awful lot of work to make this happen, and they've done an amazing job every single year. So thank you. So now I'm delighted to have Lissa Evans with us at our big book club. I chose Small Bomb at Dimperley to read this year and invited her along. And I don't read the books before in the same way that a book club works. So it was very reassuring that I absolutely loved it. And it is going to work like a book club. So hopefully most of you will have read it, but for those who haven't, it will involve spoilers. So, hopefully it will just encourage you to go and buy the book afterwards. So I'm going to start by introducing Lissa. I will ask her to tell us a little bit about Small Bomb at Dimperley, to remind those who have read it and to tell more information for those who haven't. And then I'll start the questions, but then like a book club, we will have a roving mic, and I want to encourage all of you to ask Lissa questions, and we'll all have a discussion, or ask your fellow members of the audience. If you are all a bit shy, which I'm hoping you're not, I have 3 pages of questions. So, and Lissa will, I'm sure, love to tell us.
Oh, yeah, I'll blarn.
So there's going to be plenty of chat, I hope. So, Lissa Evans grew up in the West Midlands. After studying medicine at Newcastle University, she worked as a junior doctor for 4 years before deciding to change career. A job in the BBC radio light entertainment followed, and then a switch to television, where she produced and directed series including Room 101 and also Father Ted, for which she won a BAFTA. Her first book, Spencer's List, was published in 2002, and since then she has written 6 more novels for adults, one of which, their finest hour and a half, was filmed in 2017, and 4 novels for children. Her latest book was a memoir, Picnic on Craggy Island, published last year, about producing the beloved TV series Father Ted. So, Lissa, for anyone in the audience who needs a reminder, or anyone who hasn't read it, I mean, I could describe it, but it's always so interesting to hear the author
I'll give it a go. I'm very bad at pitching, but I'll okay. Dimperley, Small Bomb at Dimperley starts in the summer of 1945. It's set in the Chilterns. There is a house called Dimperley Manor, which is a hodgepodge of a house that was started in 1500 and had a different bit added every time the family had some money. It was requisitioned during the war and is now falling apart. Living in it are the widow and her family of the last baronet, and also the widow of the current baronet, who has just been discovered to have died in Singapore in the RAF. So the person coming home to inherit this falling apart manor house is the younger son, Valentine, who has just served an incredibly undistinguished war as a corporal, and he is coming back to a house with no money, that is damp, falling to bits, and he is really taking on the mantle that he doesn't want to take, that he never thought he would have to take. And it's about what happens to save himself and his family and the inhabitants of the house. See, I told you I was bad at pitching. I wouldn't have bought that book if I'm terrible at it. Give me a pen and I can do it. But so basically, it came after I had written a series of books set during the Second World War. So it was my attempt to step outside that and to write something after the war and about the era of austerity and the extraordinary change that came upon Britain directly after the war.
So that kind of leads to my first question, which is inspiration. So was it very conscious that you wanted to set it in this period and therefore you went with that, or what started
Yes,
this
it
off?
was actually. And in fact, I've got various bits of paper here. But David Kynaston, I decided to read about the post-war era, about which I didn't know an awful lot. And I read a brilliant book called Austerity Britain by David Kynaston, who is a fantastic historian and who's written about various periods in British history. And it was incredibly interesting, but I kept on thinking, but it's not that dramatic. It's not that dramatic. Because I'd written books set during the war, I'd written books about former suffragette, during which all sorts of fantastically dramatic things happened. And then I came across this paragraph, which was, on 1st of April 1949, the 6th Marquis of Bath, wearing a pair of baggy old corduroys, stood with his wife on the front steps of one of the great Elizabethan houses and welcomed the first coach of visitors, each paying ½ a crown. And I thought, oh, okay, I think I can do something with that. But, I mean, I think probably like all writers, my inspiration comes from all over the place. And I did a tiny list of where the inspirations had come in this book. They come from the David Kynaston, but they also came because when I started reading more about country houses, they came from the diaries of someone called James Lees Milne. And James Lees Milne he worked for the National Trust, and he assessed houses to see whether they were of a high enough standard and high enough interest to be taken into the National Trust. And he wrote a series of diaries starting in the 40s and going right the way through to the 70s, which are extremely knowledgeable. He was a brilliant architectural historian, but also extremely waspish. He was terribly right-wing, an appalling snob, and they're very, very funny. And they formed a fantastic backbone of my research, because he was going around these houses during the war. He was invalided out, seeing these piles that were falling to bits that had been requisitioned and let to rot, and deciding whether they were of a high enough standard for him to take on. And that was really the backbone of the novel. And I'm just going to give you a taste of what he was like from this quote. Right, this is a quote about him in the National Trust. "The meeting was quite a success, in spite of Bertie's sole comment, which electrified the others. He remarked that the public could not, of course, be admitted to the house because they smelt. There was 2 minutes dead silence, after which Sir Geoffrey resumed the discussion as though nothing untoward had happened." So that was a fantastic starting point.
And
for me.
I know I'm going to open it up to the audience in a minute, but he makes an appearance, doesn't he, under another name?
He does.
And how the name came about is interesting.
Well, how the name came about is interesting. There was an auction for authors putting names into their books. And the person who won was a very nice woman called Tessa Kulik, and she wanted her husband's name in my book. And his name was Mark Jones. And I said, well, it's a very nice name, Tessa, but it's a bit sort of generic. I mean, what were his middle names? And his full names was actually Benedict Mark Riddoch Jones. And I thought, I can do something with that. So B.M. Riddoch Jones is James Lees Milne, and that's it. He makes an appearance in the book. He turns up at the house, rips it to shreds in print, and then goes away again.
He's brilliant.
Yeah. I really enjoyed writing that, yeah.
I read some of those diaries, actually, for when I was researching my novel, Bitter Orange, and they are waspish, as you say.
They're breathtaking. Yeah. They really are. Yeah.
Anyway, I could just keep asking lots of questions, but it is meant to be a book club. So open it out to the audience. Who has some... Anything you like. Is the lady here?
Anybody else that wants to ask one?
Anyone next?
Hello. This is a slightly strange question, but our book group read a few of your books. We read Crooked Heart, and we loved it. So we went off and read that whole trilogy. And then when we saw you were coming and we saw this book was out, we ran off and read it, and we really enjoyed it. But I've read a couple of others, and we read Odd One Out as well.
Oh, yes.
And I just noticed that you always have the sort of plethora of lots of interesting characters in the story, and particularly in this one. And I was just curious, because there was often someone who's sort of neurodiverse, and this guy who's dyslexic and the brother who's had the... And there's a sort of a bit of humour around that as well.
Yes.
And that came up in Odd One Out, and it seems to come up. I wondered if that is something that if it's just put in the mix because these different diverse people, or if it's something that you...
Yes, that's interesting. Well, I think it's just in the mix. Odd One Out was my difficult second book that I don't look back on with great fondness. It was really hard to write because the first book seems to flow out of you, and then, you know, it's very exciting. You get a contract for the second book, you think, but I've written everything that I ever wanted to write. And
everything that I know, it feels
everything that I know. The main character in Odd One Out, it's about a woman going to live back at home when she's a grown-up. And one of the people at home is her brother, who is known locally as the rubbish man, because he pushes a shopping trolley around their provincial town and collects rubbish. And that was written in the very early 2000s. And yes, that autistic character was based, I think, on... thoughts I'd had since reading a book. This sounds mad. Reading a book in the 1970s when I was a teenager. I wrote a book written by a woman called Clara Claiborne Park about bringing up her autistic daughter. And I think that was a very, very, very old thought that I'd held on to for 20 years. And then when I wrote Small Bomb at Dimperley, I don't think I had any intention to make it a treatise on brain damage or on dyslexia. I think as you're creating characters, things just come up to fill the space needed. So I wanted a central character. The Valentine is the youngest son. He is his eldest brother, who has died, was handsome, a real flash pilot. He was a hero. And Valentine, at the other end of the family, was, instead of going to Charterhouse, was sent to Umberton, which is for boys who need extra help. And he has obviously had problems always reading and writing, but this was pre-dyslexia diagnosis, and he's known as Thicky Thisset. And that's what he was known at school, and he has joined up as a corporal. He joined up in the ranks and never achieved officer status because he was too frightened of taking the exams. So I wanted somebody at the other end of the family who was the direct opposite of the brother he's replacing. And I just think it emerged as I wrote. I didn't have any particular... I wrote a pitch to start with. I wrote a series of scenes for my publisher. And Valentine just arose in that. It's odd. As you write, stuff comes up. And quite often it's not intentional. It just arises. So it wasn't written with any message. But I wanted somebody we could sympathise with and somebody we could see, perhaps from our point of view, was not the person that at the time he was seen as. Yeah.
But I think you write both Valentine and Seddy so sympathetically and so subtly. It's not at all like you tell us that this child has... Oh, no, he's an adult.
Yeah.
This adult has brain damage and this young man is dyslexic. You let us discover it in such a subtle way.
Right.
I think it's
oh, well, good. Yeah. Yes, I mean, you don't want it to feel like a treatise.
No.
And Seddy, who is the brain-damaged middle son, is... I mean, I've got a daughter who's got a learning disability, not anything nearly as serious as Seddy's, but I'm very aware how people have been treated in the past. Mm. And I wanted somebody who was there. He hadn't been shut in an institution. And the mother of the house, Valentine's mother, is an absolute gorgon. She's a terrifying and dreadfully snobby woman. And perhaps the one sympathetic side of her is that she hasn't put Seddy away. Seddy is dressed beautifully. He is her sidekick. And whenever you see Lady Irene, you also see Seddy. And I wanted that to be a part of it. That's her one redeeming feature, that she has kept her son in her life and is, in her way, proud of him.
Yeah.
It's the one humanising factor she has, because she's an absolute monster, and I loved writing her as a monster. It was really fun to write. But one-dimensional characters are no fun at all, you know.
Any more questions, Lady Irene? Whoever you'd like. So one here, another one. Ready? No, maybe. Oh, and then over here. Yeah.
Hi. So we're in the book club, and I loved your book. When I read the synopsis, I thought it's going to be like a romantic saga between the two heroines.
Yeah.
And then when I started reading it, I realized actually a lot of it made me laugh. And I thought, oh, so did she mean to make it like a funny genre?
Yes.
And there was some really hilarious parts in it. So what was your intention? Was it to make it funny, or...?
That's the way I write, I think is what I would say. My voice, when I found my writing voice, was a comedy voice. I come from... comedy and funny writing has always meant an enormous amount to me. The first books I ever sought out were funny books. I was one of these comedy geeks who knew the whole script of Fawlty Towers episodes off by heart. You know, I wrote the school pantomime. Funny lines helped me become a writer. You know, because a funny line is a difficult thing to write, and it has to be done with precision. And therefore, beautiful lines from funny books have stayed in my head my whole life. And when I became a light entertainment producer in radio, radio scripts, obviously they only have the words, so the precision of scripts is very, very important. And to write a funny line, it has to be exactly right. If I wrote a page of description and it was quite boring, but there was one marvellous line in it, that's okay, you get away with that. It'll stay in your head. But if I wrote the lead up to a funny line, and then the funny line doesn't make you laugh, I've wasted a page. You know, it has to be perfect. It's almost musical. I spend a lot of time working on the line that needs another beat here and needs a different word there. It's because comedy is important to me. Funny things are important, and my default writing, I suppose, is funny. That doesn't mean it's all funny. There are whole chapters where there's no laughs at all. But if I can write about something ironically, or if I can get a laugh, I will do it. And I think I worked in comedy because I loved comedy, but it also taught me, I worked with brilliant writers, and it taught me how good comedy can be. So when I started writing myself, that's what I was aspiring to, the best lines that I had seen as a script editor or I had produced as a producer.
So does the comedy, you know, that line, does it come in that first draft? Obviously you say
yes,
you
I
edit it, but it just kind of, it pops in your head, or does comedy come later?
No, God, no, I wouldn't ever do that, because if you think, that seems okay, but it needs some laughs, that's a disaster. It's like you need a crowbar after to force them in. It has to be part and parcel. Right. It has to be inherent in the scene, and it's often easier in dialogue. I mean, writing funny dialogue is a real pleasure, and that was something else that taught me to write. And when you radio scripts and telescripts are set out completely differently. And a telescript, you've got the page there, and you've got the character's name there, and then the line, character's name, line. But radio scripts are set out character's name, line, character's name, line. And the gold standard of a radio script is you should be able to cover up the names of the characters and still know who's speaking. And that was a fantastic, starting point. It has to be, the character has to be in their voice. And once you know the characters, you know how to get the comedy, or you look forward to getting the comedy. I always look forward to it with a group of characters. Oh, A hasn't met K yet. It's like the scene in this one where they're in a train and Valentine actually talks to Xena for the first time. They have a conversation. And I've been really looking forward to that, because they'd had no conversation in the book up until that point. And I thought, I know them now. I can make this funny.
And you always, I can't remember if it's in the train as well, but you put the baby in, the child.
Oh, Alison. I did enjoy writing her.
She was delightful.
Well,
she was so funny.
I did enjoy it, and I was very... that was a conscious insertion in the novel. I realised I had never written a mother and child before in any of my books, not a little child. And I realised that it would put an extra interesting element in. I wanted a real 3-year-old. And quite often I don't know what's coming in a novel, but I did know I wanted a scene of great intensity, possibly a love scene, at which a 3-year-old is present. And that scene in the playground where Xena and Valentine are almost getting together is continually interrupted by somebody saying, "Look at my shoes, I've got new shoes." I stamped on a slug, and I really, really enjoyed that, because it's real. It's real, and that's how people have to cope, in real life. Things aren't perfect. You don't sit down with the sunset behind you when you're trying to have an intense conversation. Real life gets in the way all the time.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So there was a question.
Yes. Lissa, I absolutely love the way that your dialogue, the characterisation of their mannerisms, all your characters in your books in the 40s, and this one as well, that they seem so much of their time, but so fresh and modern in that time as well. It's inspired my writing.
Oh, thank you.
And how do you do you watch a lot of contemporary films? Do you read a lot of contemporary books? How do you go about that?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I wrote two novels set roughly in the 90s. Those were my first 2 novels. And then this is going to be quite a long intro to what happened. But what happened was that I didn't know what to write for my 3rd novel. And I thought about, can I write about behind the scenes in telly? And I thought, will anyone really care? But at the time I was reading, I happened to be reading autobiography of an actor who was very famous between the wars. He's called Leslie Arliss. Nobody's heard of him now. But he wrote in his autobiography, "Once work begins in the studio, nothing outside is of any relative importance." And I thought, God, that's true. Because it seems so important when you're in telly what you're doing, and it's utterly trivial. And then I thought, but what if what's happening outside the studio is important? What if bombs are dropping outside the studio? Will it still take, 15 people to decide on the colour of the leading man's tie? And I started researching, and I thought, it hasn't changed at all. I know this world. I know this world of writers and actors. But also I was always interested in the home front. When I was about 13, my eldest sister bought my dad a book for Christmas called How We Lived Then, which was a book of memories about the home front, but precision memories and domestic memories. It wasn't a sociological work about society in the home front. It was very specifically, what did people eat? What did you give a child for its birthday? What did you feed a budgie on? Where did you go on holiday? And it was all very, very detailed. And my dad, who had been he was in operational research during the war. He was a scientist, so he'd served his whole war in Britain. He said, why do I need to read this? I lived through it. But I took the book and I read it and reread it, and it gave me a baseline of knowledge about the home front. So when I started researching, to get back to your question, I researched very, very intensely about film and filming and writers. But I also realised that the best source, and I did talk to some veterans, but I realised that the best source for research is stuff that is written at the time, because it's fresh, and especially during the war where everything was new, and people would actually write about what it was like to walk during the blackout or to queue for rations. And I discovered a whole raft of books that were published during the war, both novels but also reminiscences by air raid wardens or by fire officers, really good books written and published during the war, where everything's right. Every word is real, all the dialogue's real, the vocabulary is right, and that became my standard stuff. A mass observation as well, stuff recorded and written during the war. And I read nothing but that stuff for about 2 years. And since then I've eased up a bit on the intensity of that research. But yes, it's all based on contemporary stuff. But it doesn't mean I am absolutely bound to it, because certain vocabulary just sounds mad. If I used real RAF vocabulary for real RAF, wizard prang and this stuff, it sounds mad now. So you have to tailor stuff for people's ears. But I'm very keen not to be anachronistic, yeah. That was a long answer, wasn't it?
Some more questions?
Is there another one after that?
And then
read the book, but
Oh.
I'm intrigued.
Can you hold the mic up
Sorry.
a bit?
I'm a fraud because I haven't read the book.
Boo.
But I'm intrigued that the third son is coming back to inherit the tumble-down house.
Yes.
When there is a second son, even though he's obviously disadvantaged. How does that happen? I thought that was absolutely...
I did look at this. I got really involved with baronetcies and barons. I hadn't realised a tremendous amount about the nobility before, and I hadn't realised that the nobility actually consists of only sort of 5 ranks. I can't remember now, but it's dukes, marquises, basically the peers of 5 different groups, and the baronetcies are like down there. I mean, they're barely nobility. But the situation is that if you've got a baronet who goes mad, for instance, he would remain a baronet, and somebody would step in to look after him. But if you've got somebody who is unable to do it even before that they become a baronet. So in this case, Sedi, for people who haven't read it, Sedi had brain fever, meningitis, when he was about 10, and he's non-verbal. So there was no question that Sedi could ever take the mantle on, because he functions at the level of about a 3-year-old. So in that case, it would be skipped, apparently, and it would go on to the next rank. But I hope so. Anyway, I'm sure I'll be caught up at some point by somebody from the Royal College of Heralds who tells me off. But I try to get my research right.
But then you can tell them it's fiction.
I can tell them it's fiction. But you always want your reader to believe within the context what you are writing. That's the key, isn't it? Yeah. I never want a reader to think, oh no, now hang on a minute, because then they're tripped up and they won't absorb the story. Yeah. So there we go. That's all right.
Thank you. I love all your books. I came totally invested in the trilogy. And what you're brilliant at is the characters. You really fall in love with your characters. But in Small Bomb at Dimperley, I was fascinated by the way, I don't know whether it's intentional, everybody is affected by this change post-war. And it's immediately post-war, isn't it?
Yes, immediately.
And the one that struck me, and I thought, I wonder where that came from, were the girls that come back from America.
Oh, right. I really enjoyed writing that. For those who haven't read it, let me see, the widow of the brother who has died has got 2 girls who were sent to America for the war. And what happened with the evacuees to America, some of them were from rich families, and some of them were... They were kind of societies charitable societies that would send children to America to be safe. And what happened, these children were sent purportedly just for a few months. Then, of course, the war continued. Then there was a dreadful tragedy where a ship containing hundreds of evacuees called the City of Benares was torpedoed and went down, and very, very few were saved. So from then on, civilians were not allowed to cross the Atlantic. So the children that were already there couldn't be visited by their family and couldn't come back. And so even when it was safe, they were still there. So some of these children went away for 6 years. And I thought that I'd written a previous book about evacuees in Britain, and that was traumatic enough. But these children went to another culture for 6 years and then came back to an England that was unrecognisable, with terrible food and sort of grey society. I mean, J.G. Ballard writes about coming back and to this grey society full of angry, hungry-looking people, and they have come from a place with, glee clubs and, ice lollies and s'mores, and they come back to somewhere, there are pitiful stories about children coming back from America and sitting down at the table with their parents, and there's a little tin of salmon in the middle, and the child helps himself to the salmon and eats it, and then finds out afterwards that was the salmon for the whole family for that night, and they wanted a bit left over for the next day as well. So they are living in a place which is so strange. So I wanted to write about that, and the 2 girls react totally differently. One has been completely traumatised by being away, and the other one has basically become an American, which she wants to do. She wants to bring her Americanisation to Britain. So it was enjoyable to write, but it was also very instructive. Yeah. Did that answer the question? Who asked it? Was that all right? I sometimes go on for so long I can't remember what the actual question was.
No, I enjoyed the fact that the girls had very different experiences, they were at different ages, and the way that they had to adjust, and the mother has to adjust to that relationship too.
Well, she's been desperately looking forward to seeing them for 6 years, and she comes back. She sent them away age, 7 and 10, and they come back as young women. I mean, it's unimaginable, isn't it? And of course, they don't take any notice of her. And also, they're in a house where they have to walk along to the Stuart wing to find a bath. And they come in and say, "Can we have a shower?" And it's going, ha, ha, ha. Everybody's amused by the idea of even having a shower. So, it was very enjoyable to write. Yeah.
There's a Miriam here.
I think along with many other people, I felt the house itself was a character in the story. And I wonder, did you go to every National Trust property you could find? What was your process with
It was I really enjoyed writing Dimperley. I think there were two main sources. One is, like many children in the 70s, I spent a lot of my childhood being pulled around to National Trust properties. And the nearest one to us in Lichfield was Shugborough Hall, which is the Earl of Lichfield's pile, which is a very, very ugly house. But most notably, the whole ground is filled with follies. And I use that. I mean, anybody who's read Dimperley knows I invent a different folly every time a page is turned. There's a Temple of the Four Winds, the Hermitage, the Chinese Pavilion. I really enjoyed making that up. So that's from Shugborough. But the house itself, in terms of the feel of it rather than the look of it, I've pinched a bit off Sezingcote in Gloucestershire, and I've pinched various bits. But the feel of it is very much from a place called Cork Abbey. I don't know whether anybody's been there. It's just off the M1 in Derbyshire, and it's the most extraordinary place. It's a huge house from what was a very, very rich and powerful family. And one of the previous heads of the family was very, very interested in taxidermy and wildlife, and shot a lot of wildlife and stuffed it, and they're all over the house. But what happened, as time went on, the family got smaller and smaller and poorer. So until by the 1970s, there was one man living there. He was very much liked in the local village. He lived basically in the basement kitchen. And a local woman used to come in as housekeeper. And when he died, he just left the place, the National Trust. And the National Trust went in and went, whoa, because it was filled with taxidermy, it was filled with stuff from centuries back, it was falling to pieces, the ceilings were coming down, it was damp, and they'd made a brilliant decision. It was really groundbreaking, because what they said they'll do, they photographed absolutely everything, then they moved everything out, they repaired the roof so it didn't leak anymore, and then they moved everything back into the same positions it was before. So you see this house as it was at the end of this decay of a dynasty, and it is jaw-dropping. And that was the feel I wanted to get.
And it's still like that now?
It's still like that now.
Wow.
I can't recommend it highly enough. It's absolutely amazing.
Sounds great.
So I love that. And then the stuffed animals, well, it's a little bit from there. And a little bit, there used to be a museum of, I think it might still be on the south coast somewhere. Somebody used to stuff animals and then put them in little scenes. Do you remember? There were guinea pigs playing cards and things. And I just couldn't resist that. And I put that all over the house. Once you start creating something like that, there's no stopping you, actually. It's just so fun to write Dimperley. Yeah, the actual place and the ghosts in it. Yeah.
I'm just interested to know about your writing process. So how much of the story have you already decided before you write? How do you have storyboards or the map of Dimperley, that kind of thing? How do you go about writing?
I was meant to do a map and I didn't. So if anyone wants to draw one, you'll find it doesn't make sense, probably. We had a conversation about this before. I write, I mean, every writer writes in a different way. I certainly wouldn't recommend my method, but it's how I write. I've normally got a very rough arc. And what I did with Dimperley is I wrote 2 or 3 scenes, only one of which got in the book. I had Lady Irene getting cross with her daughter-in-law about the fact the bailiff had sent letters, and a couple of other little scenes. So I sort of got the feel of it. And then what I do is I start at the beginning and I move forward very, very slowly because everything has to be perfect. I have to get all the jokes right. I have to get all the plots, all the characters right as I move forward. So it's always, I always think, okay, this isn't bad, but I'm completely stuck at 15,000 words. Okay, it's not too bad, but I'm completely stuck at 23,000 words. and always, and if anything really does change in my mind, I go back and alter stuff earlier so that I can progress in the right way. Because what I find is always, if there is a moment that I'm really looking forward to and I really want to, and I think it's a good character moment, by the time you get there, you know your character so well, you think, but they wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. I would have to ram that into the plot. So I'm going to have to change what I do. And my feel of it has always been, I get stuck very, very often. And I always feel I'm like a Roomba, you know, those the little circular hoovers. And I get stuck in a corner, go boom, 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 boom. And then I realise I've got to go off in this direction. So, no, I build the bridge as I walk across it. So it's a very, very labour-intensive way of doing it. But when I get to the end, that is the end. And I normally have to do minimal rewrites.
And how long does that take?
I don't think I've written an adult book in under 3 years. Maybe about 3 years, yeah. Children's books I can write a bit fast, partly because they're shorter.
Yeah.
And partly because there's less internal rumination of the characters. Children get on with things a lot faster. So, yes, slow. Yeah, very slow.
A little bit related to your question. The title, for me, it doesn't signify the central theme of the book. So I wonder how, at what stage, do you first come up with the title and then you write, or does it come whilst you write?
That's a very good question, very pertinent one, considering what I've got on me. In this case, I called it in my head The Big House all along, which was a phrase I liked, but in fact I realised it didn't mean as much to other people, perhaps because I'd read a lot about Victorian houses and how the local people would call it the big house, but apparently the big house is also American slang for a prison. So my editor said no, that won't work. So I started thinking of other titles, and I have in my hand 8 pieces of paper which are alternate titles, which I've printed off before I came here. So no, I thought and thought and thought. And in the end, I liked Small Bomb at Dimperley because I liked, it was slightly based on, there was once apparently a competition to find the most typical headline in the time, the Times newspaper. This must be in the 40s or 50s. And the one that won was Small Earthquake in Chile, Not Many Dead. And that was the title. And I liked that kind of undercutting. And so that's where it came from, Small Bomb in Dimperley. But I mean, okay, change hands, second hand, valuable, stop clock at Dimperley, worth keeping, not worth much, little worth, the right person, unworthy, estimable, undervalued, last fixture, at home, Lady Verthis is at home. The long view, it was nearly the long view, a view from the battlements, in need of some renovation, an unlikely prospect, on and on, of doubtful value, piecework. You can never find the one you want, really, basically, you just have to go with what you feel works. I wrote a book about a former suffragette, and I had pages of titles, and then I was trying to think about insults, what women were called there, and I came up with old baggage, and I knew it was right, and I phoned up my editor and said it's called old baggage, and he laughed and said, oh no, I don't think so. And I said, you laughed when I said it. That's the title, and I think Small Bomb at Dimperley made me smile as a title. That's all I can say.
It really works for me because there's obviously the bomb, the actual small bomb, but there's the first baronet's death, which sets off this chain of events, and the fact that my head wants to say a small bomb at Dimperley all the time.
Some people say it, yes.
But the fact that you don't have that there means that it's all sorts of small bombs.
It's all sorts of small bombs, yes. You know? And Zena or Alison could be the small bomb.
Yeah.
It was interesting because what hasn't been touched upon was the fact this is the first time I've written what I think could loosely be called posh people. You know, that is cultural appropriation for me. I come from a very middle-class family, but I'm only one generation away from extreme poverty in my dad's case. And I find it easy to write about people in service or people in factories or teachers or whatever, because all my family have done all of that, and that's part of my family history. But my family history has not involved owning a stately home, so that was a huge leap for me.
Writing a romance, 2 romances.
Well, I shocked myself by writing a romance because I am an anti-soppist to the nth degree. I don't do romance, and so I slightly shocked myself by writing one in that, and I enjoyed it in the end. I really enjoyed the proposal scene. But that was a big leap. It shows that you can write outside your comfort zone if you really put in the research and you feel comfortable in it. Yeah. And in my case, as far as the posh people was concerned, it had characters who weren't. So for those who haven't read it, a central character is a woman called Zena, who, when the house was requisitioned, because a vast majority of big country houses were taken over during the war for various purposes. And Dimperley Manor was taken over as a mother and baby home, maternity hospital. And one of the women who were evacuated there from London has stayed as a secretary for the uncle. And so, using her viewpoint, I could view this whole different milieu with a cynical and interested eye. She views them as kind of as if you're in a zoo going around and seeing what's going on. So through her eyes, I could express that extraordinary difference, these people from most people in the country.
She's an outsider, but we love her. We really
She's an outsider. The inspiration for her was, again, I read it when I was about 10. There's a book called King of the Barbarines, which is an amazing book by a woman called Janet Hitchman, who was born an illegitimate child in East Anglia, and who spent her childhood and adolescence going from home to home to home to home, and eventually was put in a very good girls' charity school, and that saved her. And her experiences gave her a gimlet eye. She observed people so precisely, and I've thought about her for many years, and that's the basis for Zena. Yeah.
Any more? There's a lady at the front.
So going back a bit, did you read James Lee's Milne because you wanted to write this book, or did you? Did you write the book because of him, and also a bit tangentially? But Mrs. Mark Jones, what did she think about being made into him?
Oh, she loved it. I kept her in the loop all along.
Unbelievable.
I kept her in the loop all along what I was going to do with him, so she was fine. No, he was useful research, which turned out to be far more than useful. It turned out to be essential. I think I'd heard of him. I'd seen quotes of his. You know, when I research, I just go in all directions. You know, I don't have. I splurge research, and that's the way to do it. That's where things crop up and become exciting, and you discover things and you realise that you can use them. So I think I must have stumbled across him along the way, yes. No issues.
Any more? This lady here.
Going back to your characterisation, I was interested reading it. There's not a single character, not even one of the minor characters, who's completely unsympathetic. They all, you were saying about Lady Irene, there's always a redeeming feature that they have. And I'm thinking particularly of Alaric, who could so easily have been completely one-dimensional. And yet you get, by the end, you're actually quite rooting for him. And I wondered if this was a deliberate policy of yours when you write.
I think if you write characters with intensity, you want to be fair to them. And I inhabited more characters in this book than I've ever inhabited in a book before. I tend to write, I think it's called close third person. So it's always from somebody's point of view. And in previous books, I've never just had one person's point of view, but in a couple of books I've only had two. But in this book, I can't remember, I've never added it up, but I think it's about 7 characters. I jump inside their heads. And once I'd done that with Alaric, you know somebody isn't just two-dimensional. You can't just paint them as a buffoon because people have more to them. Even unsympathetic people have some motivation that perhaps can be sympathetic in certain lights. So I think it's to do with the intensity of writing characters. Although actually, in one of my books, Their Finest Hour and a Half, which is about making a film during the Second World War, it was sort of my revenge on actors, I have to say. And there is a deeply, deeply unsympathetic actor in it called Ambrose Hilliard, who's absolutely monstrous. And I loved writing him. I was inside his head all along, and he really is appalling. And he's made more sympathetic in the film, but appalling in a way that amused me greatly. And when I was nearly at the end of the book, and I was talking to my editor about what I would call it, and I hadn't got the end, and I said, oh, well, you could call it The Redemption of Ambrose Hilliard. And he said, no, don't redeem him. Don't. He's much better if you don't redeem him. And he, from start to the end of it, he never really steps outside his own self-puffery. But nevertheless, I feel he is rounded by the end of the book. Yeah.
I wanted to talk very briefly, because we had a little chat about this, about the actual film.
That was fun.
Which was changed to Their Finest Hour, wasn't it?
It was called Their Finest.
Their Finest.
Their Finest, because
okay.
it's annoying.
And I understand you're in it.
I mean, it's a jolly good film if anybody's seen it. I can say this because I didn't do the adaptation. I got very, very lucky. It's a good film, but I was asked if I wanted to be an extra in it, which of course I did. But the part they allocated me was a scene in which Bill Nighy, who plays this monstrous actor, gets the hump during a scene that's being filmed and walks out the studio. And I'm in the background, I'm the makeup artist. And the nicest day was walking into, it was at Kentish Town Tennis Club, and it was the costume place had moved into it for the day. And it was rack after rack of wonderful, authentic costumes. I was given a fantastic wig and also a sort of corset, so I stood right, and dress and shoes and a wig. And then on the studio day, I turned up there, and I was really worried because there's no false modesty. I cannot act at all. And the scene, I'm in the background putting some makeup on Amanda Root, apparently, with a brush. And then there's this sensation, he walks out. So I knew I'd have to react in some way. And I had these great red lips. And I was so worried that I would be so bad that I would end up on YouTube, with a big ring around. Look at this extra. Isn't she terrible? And I didn't know what to do. And all I can see when I watch that scene is just me going, ooh, these great red lips. But I have to say, it so briefly that even my own family had to play it back to watch it. So fortunately...
But they didn't cut you out?
They didn't cut me out, so it wasn't quite such a disgrace. But I was saying to Claire, the funny thing is, I write a lot in the book about how boring filming is. Because it is, everything is so slow, especially location filming is almost unbearable, especially as a producer, as I was, always thinking of the time. And what I discovered was, because I watched a day of filming as well, that even when they're filming your own book, it's still quite boring because everything happens so slowly. It's agonising. It's like money being... the hours tick away while they move a lamp and they move it back. And it all takes so long. So, everything I write about in that book is really from my own experience. Just transposed to the 40s. Yeah.
Any more? I haven't had any hands from the back. Yes. Here.
I also want to thank you for all the fantastic characters that you've created that are so memorable. And everybody's mentioned that. But I grew up in Aylesbury, and I just wondered why you chose Aylesbury.
I can't remember because I wrote that book in 2007, but my research was so precise. Aylesbury? No, it's not in Aylesbury.
Aylesbury.
Oh, Aylesbury. Why? Sorry, I thought you were talking about film. Why did I practically put a pin in a map. I thought I wanted it near enough to London so that it was feasible that Xena had been evacuated there. And I wanted a place with big stately homes and an area that I knew roughly. So I practically put a pin in the map, I'm afraid. There's absolutely no reason for it. I did do a modicum of research and went to High Wycombe, and saw the big house there. I can't remember what it's called now. The one with the Devil's Club up the hill.
Oh, yeah. The West Wycombe,
West Wycombe Hellfire Club. Yeah, that's right. Yes. Which I don't mention in the book. But no, completely random. And I'm actually quite worried because I'm going to Berkhamsted Library next week for their book group, and they're bound to pick me up on the geography. Oh, it took him 10 minutes to get from Wendover to Tring, and that's impossible. So I'm afraid, sorry, it's a bit random. The worst was when I wrote a Crooked Heart, which is partly set in St Albans during the war, where it's a sort of den of petty thievery. It all got from the local paper there at the time, I have to say. But then I went to St Albans Library and had to explain why I painted their lovely little town as this desperate den of thieves. But
I would really like to talk about some of the minor characters. So Yvonne and Miss Hersey.
Miss Hersey, yes.
Is she in love with Lady Irene? Do you see it
well,
like
that's
that?
interesting. Miss Hersey is the remaining servant at Dimperley, and she's a lady's maid. And I wanted to give that point of view because there were so many people in service. In 1900, there were more people in service than any other one job in this country. So more even than factory workers or miners, there were more people who were working as servants. It was absolutely extraordinary. And then that disappeared over the last 40 years. But her job as lady's maid was actually, certainly as she sees it, somewhat of a glamorous job. She was very much Lady Irene's sidekick. She would have been responsible for choosing the clothes, for doing little mending, for adjusting them so they were perfect for Miss Irene. And I had in mind when I wrote it, again, this is plucking stuff from all over the place. There's an Elizabeth Taylor short story called Praises, which is the last day of a woman who works in a very posh dress store who's spent her whole life in service. And she gives, as her talk at the end, her retirement party, she says, I've lived a very glamorous life. And the juniors laugh when she says that, but for her, it was. And I wanted Hersey to have that dignity. She had done something. She was a high-up servant. She would have, as it says in the book, she wouldn't have cooked a meal for herself in 30 years. She had her own little living room. She had a nice bedroom. It was really important for her, and that had all gone completely. And I wanted to show that the servant class wasn't all old men picking up poo. It was people who thought they were doing an important job. I mean, it seems bizarre to us, but for Hersey it was important. And so I enjoyed writing her, and I was also slightly inspired. Did anybody ever see, there was a reality show called The Edwardian Country House? Does anybody remember? It was absolutely fantastic. They got in a whole load of volunteers, and they staffed below stairs, and then they filled above stairs. And the below stairs staff were all, people who could do it. They had a brilliant French chef. They had these footmen who were lovely young men, about 18, who just had to stand there during meals, but who used to play football at night. There was the boot boy who was shown to where he was going to be sleeping for 6 weeks, which was the hall. It was a pile of sort of blankets in the hall. But there was also the lady's maid, and she was, she found it quite exacting what she did. It was service, but not slavery, I suppose is what you would say. So that was her. And then Yvonne, when I knew that I was writing a love story, I knew that there had to be some obstacle. beyond the fact that they were from different classes, why Valentine and Zena couldn't get together. And it was logical that his mother would want him to marry for money. And I was trying to think, how could I do something unpredictable? It's too predictable that he's put together with someone vile or someone snobby or someone nouveau riche. And I came up with the idea of somebody who was lovely, but simply didn't want to do that, didn't want to get married. And Yvonne wants to be a nun. She was evacuated to a convent school during the war. She converted to Catholicism and she wants to be a Benedictine nun. But she's a game girl, she's lovely, and if God doesn't want her to be a nun, then, Valentine seems very nice. But she hopes that God is going to give her a sign.
She's waiting for a sign.
She's waiting for a sign. And
it comes.
And it comes. And if he gives her a sign, then she'd say to her parents, God wants me, I'm going. And I like that. And I wanted to make her sympathetic. And she's a sweetheart, really.
She is so, for such a minor character, she is so real. Because you haven't just made her the kind of nasty, upper-class, snobbish fiancée. She's a pleasant girl whose ambitions lie outside marriage. So, but I mean, that was really fun to write. I enjoyed discovering that, but I spent a lot of time angsting over it. I mean, I spend a lot of time angsting. Like, when I was a producer, I worried most of the time, and now I'm a writer, I worry most of the time as well, and wake up in the night. It's reassuring, though, to hear other writers worry too.
Yes, I know, and wake up in the night and give a note. Yeah. I've got to tell you an anecdote. I got this from Claire Chambers, who's a fantastic novelist. She wrote Small Pleasures. I don't know if anybody read that, but she said, we got asked this question in an event, did you come up with ideas during the night? And she said she had a kind of waking dream. She had a brilliant idea for a scene. And she got up and she wrote it all down, all the dialogue and everything. And by the next morning, she'd forgotten about it. And she suddenly remembered during the day. And she dashed upstairs and had a look at it. And in the notebook was written, lemon meringue pie. That was it. So the middle of the night ideas are not always quite as brilliant as you think they're going to be. But I do endless notes. And walk a lot to kind of shift things. Yeah.
We really don't have much time left, but I really want to ask you about what's coming next. Did you have a book coming out soon?
I do have a book coming out soon, which is, I also write children's books. But the book I have coming out at the end of August came out of a wish to write a funny YA novel originally, because YA novels are all so incredibly miserable and awful and doomy and full of violence and horrible relationships. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to write something funny, the kind of book that I loved and which travelled with me. And it's the only book I've ever written in the first person, and it's coming out sort of for everybody, and inevitably people are going to say, oh, it's an Adrian Mole for this age, but I started writing it 5 years ago, and I didn't think of that at the time, but it's about a 14-year-old living in the northwest of England with his two mums, one of whom is a biology teacher at his own school, with a useless stoner dad who lives locally. And it's about his life, and it's called My Name is Mackenzie Bligh, and I do love it. I love it. I wanted to write a purely funny book, but I ended up sort of falling in love with my lead character. He's actually called Philip Stevens. He puts My Name is Mackenzie Bligh, and he said, no, it isn't really. I've got the most boring name on earth. Mackenzie Bligh is a great name, but I'm actually called Philip Stevens because my mums didn't want me to get teased at school. And I really love him, so that's my puff piece for My Name is Mackenzie Bligh out at the end of August.
Well, we'll look forward to that at the end of the summer. But outside, I think, even if you've read Small Bomb at Dimperley, you can get another copy for someone else. And Lissa's other books are out there as well, I think. But thank you so much for coming and joining us and chatting to us.
Thank you.